Hey homeschool friends, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I have the ultimate comparison between three really popular homeschool phonics/reading programs. Those programs being All About Reading, Logic of English, and Abeka Phonics. So I plan to go in detail discussing various aspects of each of these programs, talking about how do they deal with sight words, maybe how do they teach blending, or what's the pacing of the program, how fast is it, how slow is it. So I'm going to go through all the details for these three very popular phonics and reading programs. And so my hopes are that this video will really help you decide which of these programs would work for your family. So if that at all sounds interesting to you, stay tuned and we will get into all the details of these programs. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel if you are new here, and welcome back if you have been coming for a while. So like I said, we are talking about three really popular phonics reading programs, and I'm going to be comparing them for you today. And if you get as excited as I do about comparison videos, please consider giving the video a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel if you want to. It does really help out my channel. And so I do have a number of videos dedicated to this very topic because this has very much been my life for the last 3 to 4 years of trying to teach my oldest to read. And so I will include links to all of those videos that I will pop up on the screen right here that show you more in detail to all of the programs I'm talking about today. But I just want to let you know I have used these programs extensively, so I know them really well. And so I feel like that puts me in a really good spot to be able to compare these programs in a way that might help you. So enough intro, let's just hop into the comparison. So the first thing I want to mention is what they all have in common. And they all have in common the fact that they are heavily phonics based. There is very limited sight word usage in Abeka, All About Reading, and Logic of English. So they all very much focus on phonics and building the foundation of reading using the skills of phonics. So that is probably the thing that they are most similar in. And now I'm going to go on to the things that make them uniquely different from each other. Starting with style. So yes, they are phonics based, but they all have different approaches to how they teach phonics. So starting with Abeka, Abeka is very traditional in its approach. It is very much compared to some strategies used in public school, and how they describe their program is that it is a simple, logical, and intense use of phonics to teach reading. And one of the things they use the most is what's called a special sound. And their belief is with enough repetition and exposure to all of these special sounds, it helps the kids just recognize sounds and be able to flow through reading a word easier. So they definitely take a more traditional workbook flashcard approach to teaching to read, as opposed to Logic of English and All About Reading, which don't take that same approach, but they are more similar in that they use the Orton-Gillingham approach, or the OG method. And I will pop up a visual here. This was from the All About Reading website that talks a lot about what the OG method really encompasses, but it uses a lot of multi-sensory techniques for teaching phonics. So there's a lot of tactile use, like in both Logic of English and All About Reading, they both use tiles and they both use cards, whether it be the phonics flashcards or the word cards. And so they very much have those tactile features to them, but they both also have a unique game component. So there's a lot of moving around, which I feel like is very helpful if you have kind of a wiggly child who needs to almost feel the learning with their bodies, if that makes sense. And so those are two kind of very unique styles and approaches to a phonics heavy program. Okay, to move on to my second comparison point, and that would be pacing, which really gets to how fast does the program progress? How fast is it teaching the phonograms to the kids? And all three of them I feel like vary. And so the first one I want to talk about is Abeka. So Abeka is known for being a little bit advanced, for teaching the phonics at a quicker rate than some programs, especially these two, Logic of English and All About Reading. But what Abeka does do is it brings in a lot of review and a lot of spiraling. So it tends to hit the same topics over and over again. So for instance, something that's introduced in K4 comes back in K5, comes back in grade 1, comes back in grade 2. Although you spend a ton of time in K5 and you only really review it in grade 2. but the concept is still there. So the review and the spiral is very strong in Abeka, which I feel like allows for its pacing to be quicker, because a lot of those concepts just keep coming back throughout 1 year of lessons. So say for instance, you're doing grade 1 and you learn something in lesson 43, you will come back to that in lesson 56 and lesson 65, and it just spirals throughout the rest of the program. So there is a lot of built-in review, which I think allows for the pacing to be a little bit quicker, as opposed to Logic of English and All About Reading. So I would put Logic of English the next one down for pacing. I feel like it has a bit of a quicker pace than say All About Reading, but it's not quite where Abeka is, in my opinion, and mostly in how fast the phonograms are taught. And so within Logic of English, especially A and B, like all of A, which is intended to be the first half of kindergarten, is really reviewing all of the letter sounds. And then once you get into B, you start to get some of those 2-letter phonograms. So it definitely progresses. It progresses in a very logical fashion. And so does All About Reading. All About Reading just tends to do it at a bit of a slower pace, in my opinion. But it does do a really good job of teaching it a bit deeper. Like, it teaches more of the why behind some of the phonograms, or even some of the exceptions to those phonograms. It definitely dives in and really teaches the kids that specific concept. It just takes a while to get to some of the phonograms. Some of the phonograms that are taught in like the end of K5 of Abeka aren't taught until like level 2 or 3 of All About Reading. So it just has a bit of a slower, gradual, more in-depth approach to teaching the phonograms. So that is my thoughts on pacing. As for like assessment and review, so I kind of talked a little bit about this when I talked about spiraling, but this is probably a key concept that I want to kind of park for a bit on, is how well do each of these programs bring back the concepts to allow the kids to review them in a way that helps them learn it. And so when it comes to Abeka, like I said, they are heavily spiraled, and it has a lot of review. It has a lot of review and a lot of practice. So it is a worksheet-based program, as where All About Reading is not worksheet-based, and Logic of English has some worksheets, but not nearly to the extent that Abeka does. So Abeka uses the worksheets to help reinforce the learning, and it does have official like assessment type testing that happens, I believe, every 5 lessons. We actually do not use it, only because it's like a separate product, which irritates me a bit that I'd have to buy the test booklet and all that stuff to be able to use it. But I don't really feel like it's necessary, especially since I've been using the K5 grade 1 and grade 2 programs. I feel like I have a very solid handle on where my children's skills are at, that I don't need that assessment as much in Abeka. And that is different when it comes to Logic of English and All About Reading. So Logic of English has assessments, and they run those, I believe, every 5 lessons as well, but it takes a little longer to get through a lesson in Logic of English than it does in Abeka. I think there's only 40 lessons per book, like book A is 40 lessons, book B is 40 lessons, like grade 1 for Abeka is 170 lessons. So it takes a little longer to work your way through the lessons in Logic of English, and there's an assessment every 5 lessons. I loved the assessments for Logic of English. Why I really like them is, first, you really get to see where your kids are at. You get to see what they're understanding, what is still tripping them up, things like that. But even more so, Logic of English puts these charts in their program that helps you understand expectations for your children. Like, at this point in the program, they should have mastered these things, and they should be working on these things, and these things they just learned, so we have no expectation of them really knowing it. And having that help as the teacher was very nice. I was able to kind of take that and see where we were at. But what Logic of English did not have, in my opinion, is it is not spiraled. It does not have that built-in review that Abeka had. And that is more where I struggled, because we did Logic of English first, and as a new homeschool teacher, I had a tougher time knowing how to bring in that review myself, or where we should slow down, or maybe we need to repeat some stuff. I just didn't have the confidence to do that at that point in time. I could do it better now, hands down, I could do it better now, but I just didn't have that built-in review, so that was harder for me as a homeschool teacher to know how to review, because it wasn't really built into the lessons. And that's the same critique I have for All About Reading, is it was hard for me to understand how to slow it down. Like when my kiddo was getting behind her, it was becoming too much. Like for instance, we would get too many of those word cards all stacked up that we should have mastered, but we haven't mastered them yet. Does that mean we totally stop? Does that mean we keep going and review more? I just struggled with that. And they did have help in the book. By no means was there no hand holding. I think I just didn't do as good a job bringing in the review as I should have with both All About Reading and Logic of English, because they both operate more as a mastery program versus a spiral program, and it doesn't have as much review. So moving on to number 4, blending. How do these programs teach blending? So blending is a skill that is difficult to master for a student who is just starting the process of learning to read. I feel like that is an area that often will trip up the kids if they're not quite ready to blend or to learn how to blend. And so I feel like Logic of English kind of jumped in to blending. One of the ways they did it was using these action words. And so you were trying to learn how to blend two consonants together, such as jump. And so it would, at the beginning, you'd be sounding out j, mp. And trying to get my kids to mpa was very hard and difficult. But what I did like about Logic of English was it was active. So they were picking these active words so that once they accomplished reading that word or blending those sounds, they were able to do the action, which my son really liked. So that was a definite plus. It just took a lot of practice to work on blending those sounds. And the same for All About Reading. I feel like it tended to use more of the tiles, which Logic of English did too, but when I think of tiles, I think of more All About Reading. And they would try to get the kids to blend by pushing the tiles together and to say the sounds faster, to practice saying them slow and then to say them faster, which is definitely a good technique. And it would have worked, I feel like, if I had given it a little bit more time, or if I would have been a little bit more patient, or found ways to bring in the reviewer to review those ideas. I just found myself getting perpetually behind because my kids were struggling to master the blending aspect. And then it comes to Abeka, which Abeka takes a completely different approach to this, which I have heard this is the critique for the program for some people, is how it teaches blending. And it does that very early, like K4, K5, practicing these like blend ladders where it's a consonant and a vowel, and they're practicing saying like ba, be, bi, ba, ba, and they just go down there. And then if they had like a special sound like bull, then it'd be like blah, blah, bleh, blah, blah. You get what I'm saying. But they're practicing putting those sounds together, not necessarily making words, but they're making the sound. So they're getting used to kind of running those sounds at the beginning of the word together, so then they're not stuck on the b, I. Instead, they see that and they say bleh. So hopefully that made sense. But I feel like that was really what tipped it over for my kids, is enough of practicing those ladders and different flashcards with the blends on them that just really helped it click for them, and it just gave them enough practice to see it, to say it, and then when they got to words, it was easier to make that blending sound because they've had a lot of practice. That's just how it worked out for us within the topic of blending. Okay, so the 5th comparison I want to make between these 3 programs is if it was a partial or full language arts program. And these 3 kind of vary across the spectrum for that. The one that is the full language arts program is Logic of English. So Logic of English brings in really all the subjects of language arts. So you're talking phonics, you're talking reading, handwriting, spelling, reading comprehension, some other things. I think they had even like dictation and things in there when you got to like foundations C and D. So it had everything. It was a full language arts curriculum, which is so very appealing, which is what kind of drew me to them initially. But then you have like Abeka, which is a kind of step down from that, where it is definitely more phonics and reading driven, but it also does teach spelling within the phonics lesson. So they do have a fully separate spelling program. But what I like is within the phonics lesson, it will teach a lot of like dictation. So they're listening to like the blend, or they're listening to a word, and it has to do with the phonograms we are learning. And then they write those words on the board, or they write those blends on the board. So it's basically reverse phonics. So they're hearing the phonograms and using them in spelling. And in the course of that, Abeka will throw in some relevant spelling rules that can help the kids decide like which phonogram to use in which situation. So it does have some spelling aspects to it. And then you have All About Reading, which is strictly reading. It is a phonics reading program, no spelling, no handwriting, nothing else. It just really focuses on that. And then you can add the All About Spelling program to that program to round it out a bit more. So that's a comparison as for where it falls out on like partial versus full language arts program. The sixth comparison I want to make between these programs is how they teach vowel sounds. They each take a different direction with this. So to start with, Logic of English teaches all the sounds of the vowels at once. So when the kids are exposed to the phonogram A, they learn that it says a, ah. They don't just learn ah. They don't learn just the short sound. They're exposed to all of them. And then as the program progresses, they're taught when to use like the long sound or the broad sound of those vowels. And so it comes out, but initially they are taught all three so that later down the road they're not confused where they start to think, well, A always says ah. And then they're confused when you teach them that it also says a couple other sounds. So that's Logic of English. All About Reading starts with the short sounds, and it progresses with just the short sounds for quite a while until it starts to bring in the long vowel sounds, especially when it starts to teach the silent E rule, which I believe silent E is taught kind of midway through level 2, which is kind of a difference between the programs as well. I believe that silent E is taught in Foundations B of Logic of English, and silent E is taught in K5 of Abeka. So that definitely makes a difference when the long vowel sounds are taught. And Abeka starts with just short, but they quickly follow that with long sounds because they teach it with these rules, the one vowel rule and the two vowel rule. One vowel rule being when there's one vowel in a word, it often says it's short sound. And the two vowel rule is if there's two vowels in the word, the first one says it's long sound and the second one is silent. And they teach those two rules fairly early on. Within like K5, it's about halfway, and like grade 1, it's like less than 10, which definitely increases the speed with which kids can read some words that have a double vowel phonogram, is that for the most part they're able to read it unless it's like a special sound. So that is how they handle vowels, which is just a little bit different. And the last area of comparison is I wanted to talk about sight words. So I said at the very beginning that all three of these programs are very phonics heavy, but they each have kind of their own approaches for teaching those sight words or teaching those words that are a little bit outside of the normal phonogram rules. So with All About Reading, they teach what's called leap words, and on the word card it will have a picture of a frog, and that will signify to the kid that this word doesn't necessarily follow the normal phonics rule, and so there'll be some leap words within the word cards, and they will teach those within various lessons to help the kids. And that starts out well within level 1 and kind of progresses from there. As for Logic of English, they use high frequency word cards, and I can't quite remember when they start introducing the high frequency word cards. I think it's kind of at the very end of A, and then they play a lot of games with them. But the key part for the high frequency words is most of those words, the kids have the skills for sounding them out, because within Logic of English, they teach the schwa sound, or kind of that lazy sound, early in the program. And so then kids are able to kind of handle some of those oddball words, or what are more commonly classified as sight words, because they taught the schwa sound a little bit earlier than other programs. So they usually have the phonetic skills to read those high frequency words. So they're not really sight words, but the program's trying to get to them to kind of recognize them on sight, basically. And then the last program, so Abeka, doesn't necessarily use sight words in its phonics program, like this phonics lesson for the day, but it does point them out within the readers that are associated with that lesson. And so as the kids are working through their new special sounds, there will often be some sight words within that story that you just need to point out and teach them what that word says. So Abeka definitely does tend to take a more traditional approach to teaching sight words, but there is never a time when you have like sight word lists or ladders or anything like that. There's a much heavier focus on the phonograms, and then they kind of teach the sight words as they come up. And so I feel like those are 7 areas with which these 3 programs differ a little bit in how they teach phonics and reading. And so I wanted to highlight that. Again, I hope this was really useful for you. I hope if you were trying to research these 2 programs, that this brought you some new insights, some new ideas for which program might fit your family the best. And if so, I would love to hear about it down below. Please comment, let me know which one you're leaning towards, or if you have any additional questions also put those down below. I love to just chat with you guys a little bit more down there. And again, give the video a thumbs up if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. But otherwise, I will see you guys in the next homeschool video. All right, take care.